Every single morning for 11 months, this man showed up at the same door, a canned, even after he had nothing left to give. 2 knocks, a pause, then a third tem. She always knew it was him. But today, the door wouldn't open the way it always did.
The face staring back at him wasn't Eleanor's. It was the CEO who fired him, Con, standing in her mother's doorway. Said a word, Tang, because both of them knew exactly who the other one was.
1 year ago, she signed the paper that ended his career. Today, she's the only thing standing between him and the woman he calls family.
David Harmon had exactly $40 left in his checking account, and he was about to spend 6 of it on a bag of butterscotch candies that a woman he wasn't even related to loved more than anything else in the world. If you have ever loved someone enough to give them your last few dollars without thinking twice, stay with this story until the end, because what happens next will remind you why kindness is when. And if this story moves you, hit like and subscribe, because there is so much more heart where this came from. It was a gray Tuesday morning in early October when David stood in the checkout line at the corner market on Larkspur Street, the same market he had walked to every single day for the past 11 months. He was 37 years old, broad-shouldered, but leaner than he used to be, with dark brown hair going silver at the temples, and hazel eyes that carried the particular exhaustion of a man who had not slept well in almost a year. He wore the same faded navy work jacket he always wore, the collar frayed, the left elbow patched, with a square of denim his daughter had sewn on for him because she thought it looked cool, like a spy. He set the candies on the counter, along with a small carton of eggs and a loaf of bread, and the cashier, a teenager named Priya who had grown fond of him, gave him a small nod that said she knew exactly who the candy was for. "Tell Mrs. Eleanor I said hi," Priya added, sliding the bag across the counter. "She still owes me a story about that trip to Portugal she keeps promising to finish." David smiled, the kind of tired smile that still reached his eyes, and told her he would pass it along, the way he passed along a dozen small kindnesses every day, without ever once expecting anything back. 11 months earlier, David had been a shift supervisor at Coldwell Logistics, a regional distribution company that moved everything from furniture to pharmaceuticals across 3 states. He had worked there for 9 years, starting on the loading dock and working his way up until he was the man new employees were told to shadow if they wanted to learn how the warehouse really ran. He was proud of that job, not because it paid well. It paid decently, nothing more, but because it was steady, and steady was everything to a single father raising a 9-year-old daughter named Emma on his own, since her mother passed away when Emma was 4. Then came the restructuring. Coldwell Logistics had recently been acquired by a larger holding company, and the new CEO, a sharp, precise woman named Vanessa Cole, had been brought in to modernize operations and trim inefficiencies, which was corporate language for layoffs. David had never met her in person. He had seen her only once, from a distance, walking briskly through the warehouse floor in a charcoal gray suit, flanked by 2 men in equally sharp suits. Her ash blonde hair pulled back so tightly it looked like it hurt. She did not stop to speak to anyone that day. 3 weeks later, David received an email, not even a phone call, informing him that his position had been eliminated due to performance-based restructuring. Performance-based. David had the highest safety record and the second highest efficiency rating in the entire regional network. Something about that word, performance, sat wrong in his stomach for weeks. What David did not know, what none of the workers knew, was that the decision had not come from why at all. It had come from a man named Marcus Reyes, the operations director who had worked alongside David for 6 years, and who had quietly resented him ever since David was promoted over him for the senior supervisor role. When the new CEO asked her directors to submit performance reviews to justify the restructuring, Marcus saw an opportunity. He falsified 2 incident reports, backdated a disciplinary note that never should have existed, and made sure David's name rose to the top of the list marked for elimination. Vanessa Cole, drowning in spreadsheets during her first frantic month on the job, signed off on the list without ever meeting the man whose life she was about to upend. It was, in the coldest sense, just a name on a page to her. She had no idea that name belonged to a father who would soon be counting coins for butterscotch candy. David did not tell Emma how bad things had gotten. He picked up whatever work he could find, hauling, odd repair jobs, 2 shifts a week at a hardware store that barely covered the electric bill, but none of it added up to what Coldwell Logistics once had. His old friend Tom Ferris, another supervisor who had been cut in the same round of layoffs, called him most weeks to trade job leads and complain about the unfairness of it all. Tom had worked beside David for years and had watched Marcus Reyes maneuver his way up the chain with a kind of oily patience that always unsettled him. Something about those layoffs never sat right with me, Tom told David more than once over cheap coffee at the diner near the old warehouse. You had the best numbers on the floor. I'd bet good money somebody wanted you gone, for reasons that had nothing to do with performance. David always waved it off. He didn't have the energy to chase conspiracies. He had rent and a daughter and a refrigerator that needed filling. Still, every single morning, rain or shine, good week or terrifying week, David walked 2 houses down from his small rented duplex to check on Eleanor Cole. Eleanor was 78 years old, a widow with silver white hair she wore in a soft bun, and a stout face lined with the kind of wrinkles that come from a lifetime of laughing more than frowning. She had lived alone in the pale yellow house on the corner for 6 years, ever since her husband passed, and for the last 2 of those years, her hips had grown too weak to trust on the porch steps without help. David had started helping her almost by accident. He noticed her struggling with a bag of mulch one Saturday afternoon, back when he still had his job, and he simply walked over and carried it for her. She thanked him with a slice of pie. He came back the next day to return her empty dish, and somehow, without either of them planning it, that became every day. He brought her groceries. He read her the mail when her eyes were too tired. He fixed the porch light, the leaky faucet, the wobbly step. In return, she told him stories about her life, taught him her mother's biscuit recipe, and, more than once, quietly slipped an extra $20 into his jacket pocket that he always tried to give back, and she always refused to take. You're not doing this for money, David Harmon, she told him once, wagging a wrinkled finger at him from her rocking chair. So don't insult me by acting like I'm paying you. I'm just an old woman who likes the company. Humor me. He never told her he had lost his job. He didn't want her pity, and more than that, he didn't want anything to change between them. Some mornings, sitting on her porch with a cup of weak coffee, listening to her talk about her late husband, or her daughter who worked some big important job in the city and rarely visited, were the only moments in David's entire week where he did not feel like he was drowning. That particular gray Tuesday, David walked up Eleanor's porch steps with the bag of groceries and the butterscotch candies, and knocked twice, the way he always did. 2 soft knocks, then a pause, then a third. It was a rhythm Eleanor knew, a rhythm that told her it was David, and not a stranger. But the door that opened was not Eleanor's. Standing in the doorway was a woman in her mid-40s, sharp green eyes, ash blonde hair pulled back in a low, severe knot, wearing a charcoal gray blazer that looked entirely out of place against the faded floral wallpaper of Eleanor's front hallway. For one long, suspended moment, neither of them said a word, because David recognized her instantly, and the recognition hit him like a fist to the chest. It was Vanessa Cole, the CEO, the woman whose signature, though she would not remember it, had ended his career 11 months earlier. "Can I help you?" Vanessa asked, her voice clipped, guarded, the voice of a woman used to strangers wanting something from her. Is Eleanor here? I usually bring her groceries around this time," David managed, his mind racing, trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the stories Eleanor had told him for months about her daughter in the city. Something shifted in Vanessa's expression. "You're the one who brings her groceries? Every day?" She looked at the bag in his hands, at the butterscotch candies visible at the top, and something in her sharp composure cracked just slightly. "My mother fell 3 nights ago. She's in the hospital. I flew in as soon as I heard. I've been staying here to sort out her house and her care." David felt the floor tilt beneath him, not because of Vanessa, but because of Eleanor. Is she okay? Which hospital? I need to see her. Vanessa studied him for a long moment. The same measuring, evaluating look she gave executives across a boardroom table. Except now, it was aimed at a man in a patched work jacket, holding groceries for her mother. Riverside General. She's stable. Broken hip. Surgery went well, but she's going to need weeks of recovery. She paused. She talks about you constantly, you know. David this, David that. I thought she was exaggerating. She's not, David said quietly. She's family to me at this point. At Riverside General, David met Sandra Cole, no relation. The nurse on Eleanor's floor liked to joke, though David suspected Sandra had heard that same joke 1,000 times and still laughed for Eleanor's sake. A warm, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had been caring for Eleanor since the surgery. Sandra was the one who first told David how frightened Eleanor had been the night of the fall, alone on her kitchen floor for nearly 40 minutes before a neighbor's dog would not stop barking and someone finally checked on her. She kept asking for you, Sandra told David quietly in the hallway. Not her daughter's number. Yours. We had to look it up from her phone. That detail stayed with David long after he left the hospital that night. A quiet ache settling into his chest at the thought of Eleanor alone and frightened, reaching for a name that was not family, not by blood, but had become family all the same. Over the following days, something unusual began to happen. Vanessa, who had built her entire career on control, efficiency, and never wasting a single unnecessary minute, found herself unable to stop noticing the man who kept showing up. David visited the hospital every afternoon, sometimes with Emma in tow after school, the little girl climbing onto the foot of Eleanor's hospital bed to show her a drawing or a spelling test with a gold star on it. He brought Eleanor her favorite tea in a thermos because she hated hospital coffee. He sat for hours reading to her from worn paperback mystery novels, doing different voices for the characters, until Eleanor laughed so hard, a nurse had to ask them to quiet down. He never once asked Vanessa for anything. Not money, not thanks, not even acknowledgement. He simply kept showing up, the way he always had. Vanessa began showing up at the hospital earlier, just to catch the tail end of his visits. She told herself it was to monitor her mother's care, but one evening, sitting in the sterile hospital hallway after David had left, Eleanor took her daughter's hand and said, "You know, sweetheart, that young man lost his job almost a year ago. Some big company let him go. He never told me outright. I pieced it together from things he didn't say. And still, every single day, rain or shine, he showed up for a lonely old woman who isn't even his blood. Meanwhile, you, my own daughter, call me on Sundays if you remember." The words landed harder than Eleanor perhaps intended, and Vanessa sat in silence for a long time after her mother drifted off to sleep. Something about the phrase, "big company, let him go," nagged at her. That night, back at her mother's house, unable to sleep in the unfamiliar guest bedroom, Vanessa opened her laptop and began digging through the restructuring records from 11 months earlier. Records she had signed but never truly read. She found David Harmon's name, buried in a spreadsheet of 42 eliminated positions. She found the 2 incident reports attached to his file, submitted by Marcus Reyes. And because she was, whatever else she was, extremely good at her job, she also found the inconsistencies. A report dated for a shift when David Harmon's time card showed he had been on approved medical leave for his daughter's surgery. An accusation of equipment mishandling for a piece of machinery David wasn't even certified to operate at that location. Vanessa did not sleep that night. By 6 a.m, she had pulled personnel files, safety records, and 3 years of performance reviews that told a story entirely different from the one she had been handed. David Harmon had the second best safety record in the company's history. He had trained 11 supervisors who were still with Coldwell Logistics today. He had once worked a 16-hour shift during a snowstorm to make sure a shipment of medical supplies reached a children's hospital on time, and he had never once put it on an expense report or asked for recognition. The following week, once Eleanor was stable enough to be moved home, with a live-in aide named Carol Jennings arranged through Vanessa's assistant, David spent an afternoon showing Carol the small rituals that made Eleanor's days easier, how she liked her tea steeped exactly 4 minutes, which mystery novels she had already finished twice, and pretended to forget, the particular tilt of the porch chair that eased the ache in her hip. Carol, a steady, kind-eyed woman who had cared for elderly patients for over a decade, watched David with something like quiet respect. "Most families I work for barely know these details about their own parents," she told him. "You're not even her son." David only shrugged. "Guess I just paid attention," he said, and went back to fixing the loose porch railing before he left for the day. That same week, Vanessa asked David to meet her, not at the house, but at the Coldwell Logistics headquarters downtown, in the very building he had not set foot in for nearly a year. David almost didn't go. Standing outside the glass doors, in his patched jacket, holding the single dress shirt he owned pressed as neatly as he could manage, on an ironing board balanced on 2 kitchen chairs, he felt smaller than he had in months. But he thought of Emma, and he thought of Eleanor telling him to hold his head up, and he walked in. Vanessa met him in a conference room on the top floor, and this time, she did not sit across a desk from him like an executive addressing a former employee. She sat beside him. "I owe you an apology," she said, and David watched as the composed, guarded CEO he had met on her mother's porch seemed to disappear, replaced by a woman who looked, for the first time, genuinely humbled. "I signed off on your termination without ever looking closely enough. I trusted the wrong person, and it cost you your job, your income, and nearly a year of struggling that you didn't deserve. I found out this week exactly what happened, and exactly who made it happen." She told him everything: the falsified reports, the fabricated disciplinary note, Marcus Reyes's years of quiet resentment, finally curdling into sabotage. It had not been simple to uncover. When Vanessa first began pulling old shift records 2 days earlier, Marcus caught wind of it, through a nervous clerk in human resources, and cornered her outside her own office, insisting the old files were not worth reopening, and that David Harmon had been trouble waiting to happen long before the layoffs. His voice had stayed calm, almost pleasant, but his eyes had not, and Vanessa, trained by a decade of boardrooms to recognize a man protecting a lie, only grew more certain something was buried underneath his composure. She dismissed him from her office without answering, then spent the entire night cross-referencing time cards, badge swipe logs, and maintenance certifications, until the fabrication collapsed under its own weight. By morning, she had enough documentation to end his career in a single meeting. Marcus had already been terminated that morning, his own falsifications documented and confirmed by 3 separate employees, including Tom Ferris, who came forward the moment word spread that someone at the top was finally asking the right questions. "I can't undo 11 months, Vanessa said, "but I can offer you your position back, with back pay for the time you lost, and, frankly, a promotion to regional operations manager. Because after reading your file, I don't understand how we ever let you go in the first place." David sat quietly for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was thick. "I didn't do any of this to get my job back," he said. "I did it because your mother needed someone, and I needed somewhere to put all the love I had left, over after losing my wife, and almost losing everything else. But I won't pretend I'm not grateful. Emma's been asking me why I look so tired all the time. I'd like to tell her I don't have to anymore." Vanessa smiled, the first full, unguarded smile David had seen from her. "There's one more thing," she said. "My mother would like to see you tonight. She has something she wants to say, and she made me promise I wouldn't say it for her." That evening, David walked up the familiar porch steps for what felt like the 1,000th time, except now Eleanor was waiting in her wheelchair by the open door, a soft quilt over her lap, her eyes bright despite the ordeal of the past weeks. Vanessa stood behind her, and for the first time since David had known this family, mother and daughter looked at ease in each other's presence, something healed and unspoken passing between them. "David Harmon," Eleanor said, reaching for his hand with both of hers. "You showed my daughter something I have been trying to teach her since she was a little girl and forgot somewhere along the way climbing all those corporate ladders, that the measure of a person isn't to go the title on their office door. It's whether they show up for someone who has nothing to offer them back. You showed up for me for almost a year, every single day. when you had every reason in the world to stop. Her eyes glistened. You gave this old woman her daughter back. Do you understand that? For the first time in 5 years, my daughter sat with me in a hospital room and just talked to me. Really talked to me. Because of you. David felt his throat tighten, and Emma, who had come running up the walkway behind him with her yellow backpack still on, wrapped her arms around his waist and looked up at Eleanor with the easy love of a child who had known this sweet woman as a second grandmother for months. Are you coming home soon, Miss Eleanor? She asked. I made you a card. It has 100 hearts on it. I counted them too, sweetheart, and you missed 3, Eleanor laughed, pulling the girl into a hug. We'll fix that together. In the months that followed, David returned to Coldwell Logistics as Regional Operations Manager, a title that came with security he had not felt in years. And one of his first decisions was recommending Tom Ferris for rehire, a recommendation Vanessa approved without hesitation once she reviewed Tom's record. He never stopped walking 2 houses down every single morning to check on Eleanor, and Vanessa, who once flew back to the city within 48 hours of any visit, began staying for entire weekends, sitting on that same porch, drinking weak coffee, listening to her mother's stories the way David always had. Carol still came by twice a week to help with the harder chores, and Sandra dropped in on her days off just to check on the woman she had come to adore during those long hospital nights. The 3 of them, David and Vanessa and Eleanor, in their own unlikely way, became something like family, bound not by blood or business, but by the simple, radical act of showing up for someone when there was nothing to gain from it. Years later, when Emma was asked in a school assignment to write about someone she admired, she did not write about an athlete or a celebrity. She wrote about her father, a man who lost almost everything and still had enough left over to give away every single day, and who taught her that kindness, offered freely and without an audience, has a way of finding its way back to you when you least expect it. Sometimes, even in the shape of the very door you knock on every morning. If this story touched you the way it touched us to tell it, remember that somewhere near you, right now, there might be an Eleanor waiting for a knock on the door, and it might not cost you anything but a little bit of your time to change everything for both of you. Thank you for watching until the very end, and we will see you in the next story.